Have you ever wondered what really happens when a company replaces decades of experience with a cheaper, younger version of you and assumes nothing will change? My name is Miguel Ramírez. I'm 56 years old, and 3 months ago I was called into a meeting that would quietly end my 22-year journey at NovaGrid Solutions. No fanfare, no thank you. Just a smile from the new CEO and a line I'll never forget. "Miguel, we appreciate everything you've done, but it's time to modernize." He said it like I was a dusty server they were finally unplugging. That afternoon, I walked out of the building I had helped wire from the ground up, without protest, without begging, knowing what they didn't. They had just fired the only person who truly understood how their systems worked, not because I wanted to hold power, but because no one ever asked. 3 weeks later, their entire infrastructure started to fall apart. This is not a story of sabotage. It's about what happens when you remove the wrong piece from a structure and everything collapses. If you've ever felt underestimated, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let's begin. For more than 2 decades, I walked through the same glass doors every morning at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, always the first one in, and often the last to leave. NovaGrid Solutions wasn't just my employer, it was part of my identity. I joined in the summer of 2001, back when the company was still operating out of a converted storage unit behind a logistics yard. There were 8 of us then, and I was hired to set up the internal server and network infrastructure from scratch. I had come from a government contract job, tired of bureaucracy, ready to build something leaner, faster, smarter. And I did. In the years that followed, I became more than just an IT lead. I became the system. When a hurricane hit Houston in 2005 and knocked out power across 3 counties, it was my quick thinking and offline backup process that got us running again while our competitors were still calling disaster recovery services. When a major pharmaceutical client needed legacy warehouse software integrated into a new cloud system, I wrote the bridge myself overnight. No one asked. I saw it needed to be done, and I did it. And yet 22 years later, I found myself in a conference room with frosted glass and a view of downtown sitting across from a man who couldn't pronounce half the software platforms I had built over the years. Callum Wright, the new CEO. 42 fresh from a consulting firm in San Francisco, all sharp suits and sharper buzzwords. He spoke in phrases like digital pivot and agile monetization, and every time I asked for clarification, he would smile like I was a loyal dog, failing to understand a new trick. That day, he didn't bother with much preamble. "Miguel, we're reimagining the structure of the organization. You've been incredibly valuable, but we believe now is the time to evolve." He used the word evolve like I was some outdated life form. Beside him sat Miriam from HR Legal Pad in hand, nodding solemnly. She'd worked there for 5 years. She didn't make eye contact. "We're offering a transition package and 3-month severance." Callum continued pushing the papers toward me like he was offering a gift. "We'll need your handover notes and passwords. Julian will be stepping into your role." Julian, 26 years old, polite, smart, eager to learn, and completely unprepared. I had hired him myself 2 years earlier, straight out of university. He had shadowed me, asked questions, tried to absorb what he could, and I had promised him we'd do a full systems training soon once things slowed down. But they never did. There were always new integrations to manage firewalls, to test outages, to prevent. Still, I liked him. He had potential. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that they weren't just replacing an employee. They were removing the only person who knew how NovaGrid's entire digital nervous system operated and what held it together. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I looked at Callum, then at Miriam, and finally down at the exit folder in front of me. "Understood," I said quietly. I signed the papers. The room stayed silent. Back at my desk, I began packing my things. My nameplate, a framed photo of my daughter on her high school graduation day, a notebook with diagrams no one else could interpret. I logged out of every terminal encrypted sensitive access paths and left notes where they made sense, not for revenge, just for security. Julian came by as I was taping the box shut. "Is this real?" he asked, almost whispering. "Yeah," I said. "Looks like you're the guy now." He looked pale, like a boy who'd just been handed the keys to a machine he didn't know how to drive. "You'll do fine," I added. And I meant it. But I also knew he wouldn't do it alone, not because he wasn't capable, but because no one could. I walked out of Nova Grid that afternoon without ceremony. No farewell speech, no goodbye lunch, no gold watch, just the quiet realization that loyalty doesn't always go both ways. What Callum didn't realize or chose to ignore was that while he had cut one salary from the books, he'd also severed the invisible threads that kept his systems from collapsing. And I was no longer the one on call to stop it. Nova Grid never fully understood what I did not, because I kept it secret, but because they never truly asked. There was always an assumption that as long as the lights stayed on, the servers stayed cool, and the data moved from system to system, without delay, everything must be simple, replaceable, easily delegated. The truth was far more complicated. When I first arrived at Nova Grid in 2001, their infrastructure was barely a network. 2 routers, 1 shared drive, no redundancy, no firewalls. I had to bring in my own laptop and tools the first week just to configure a working environment. Over time, I built everything: the core internal network, the vendor authentication bridges, the automated logistics, sync the live inventory forecasting module. None of it came from a box. All of it was custom designed to solve real-world problems in real time. I didn't work from a manual. I was the manual. Over the years, I developed systems not just to function, but to survive. Redundancy was built in at every layer, mirrored backups at 2 off-site locations, automated failovers that rerouted operations within seconds if a script failed, and alert systems that pinged my phone before anyone else noticed something was wrong. And when those systems evolved, I updated them not once or twice, but constantly, to adapt to new clients, new software, new threats. My code didn't look elegant to consultants. It wasn't written to win awards. It was written to hold up under real-world pressure when milliseconds mattered and vendor deadlines couldn't afford a second of lag. I embedded fail-safes within fail-safes. One script I designed for a pharmaceutical distributor had over 300 conditional checks, 3 fallback routines, and encryption protocols that rotated every 72 hours. No off-the-shelf software could have handled their needs, and none of the current team even knew that script existed. It lived in a secure vault, encrypted and locked with a series of layered access tokens. Julian the junior I had trained asked me about it once I told him we'd cover it soon. But soon never came. That's the thing: when you're the person, everything silently depends on no one notices until you're gone. Some people hoard knowledge out of fear. I documented everything out of necessity. I built an internal documentation system that required admin clearance, not to hide anything, but because a simple user guide wouldn't explain why a routine was structured the way it was. There were reasons behind every sequence, every anomaly handler, every exception built into the system. But unless you'd lived through those failure events, unless you'd held the weight of systems crashing at 2 a.m., you wouldn't know why they mattered. And no one ever asked me to explain them. Not once in 22 years did someone sit down and say, "Miguel, walk me through the backbone of how this place runs." They just trusted that it would. They thought of me as dependable, which over time became invisible. When things never break, people stop thinking about the person preventing the breaks. That invisibility is dangerous. It creates a false sense of simplicity. It makes leaders like Callum believe they can replace you with someone half your age and half your salary, and expect the same results as if experience is a plug-in module. There was one particular protocol I remember well, an automation chain that connected 6 vendor systems through API calls, some of them undocumented, some of them deeply unstable. I had to write scripts that validated responses in 5 different formats: converted them, patched them, and routed them through a security layer that would meet FDA compliance. It took me 6 months to build it, and the final version ran flawlessly for 7 years. Not once did anyone ask what made it tick. But if it failed, the entire pharmaceutical order system would collapse in hours. And now that protocol, like dozens of others, was running without oversight. Or worse, under the guidance of people who didn't even know it existed. I didn't leave NovaGrid with resentment. I left with a quiet understanding I had done my job so well that they forgot it was a job at all. But I also knew that what I left behind was not simple. It was a complex web of interdependent systems built over decades, customized for survival, and held together by the hands of someone they had just let go. And no one knew how to catch it if it started to fall. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when my phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table halfway through my second cup of coffee, scrolling through job listings I wasn't excited about. Retirement wasn't on the table yet, not financially, not mentally. I still had more to give, but for the first time in over 2 decades, I was no longer anyone's go-to guy. My hands were idle, my tools untouched. The caller ID said Julian. I hesitated before answering. A part of me thought he was calling to say thank you again, maybe to ask a quick question about where to find a file or how to run a routine check. But the tone in his voice immediately told me this was something else. "Hey, Miguel." "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, sounding like someone who hadn't slept much. "But we've got a serious problem." I didn't respond right away. I could feel something tightening in my chest. I had known this moment might come, but I didn't expect it so soon. "What's going on?" Julian took a breath. The automation script stopped running at 2:08 a.m. We didn't notice until a logistics client called this morning to complain about missing inventory data. Then we found out the vendor sync completely failed. The API calls are returning null values and error logs are piling up. He paused as if waiting for me to interrupt. I didn't. We tried to manually run the backup process, but it keeps throwing credential errors. None of us know how to overwrite it. The consultants we brought in said they cleaned up some of your scripts last week to eliminate redundancy, but now nothing's working the way it should. Of course they had. I got up and walked to the living room window, staring at the quiet street outside. The sky was clear, the world calm completely, unaware that an entire company's infrastructure was crumbling behind the scenes. Julian continued, his voice tightening. 3 clients have already contacted us this morning. One says their analytics dashboard is blank. Another says their overnight pricing update failed. The last one, the pharmaceutical one, says their compliance report didn't generate. And now the CEO is freaking out. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about that specific report system, a carefully timed script chain that ran through 3 authentication points, extracted data, cleaned it, verified timestamps, and uploaded it to a secured channel monitored by regulatory auditors. It had taken me months to build and was so sensitive to timing that a 5-minute delay could trigger compliance flags. I had documented it, but not in a way someone could just read and understand overnight. It required more than instructions. It required context, understanding. "Do you still have access to the backup keys?" Julian asked. "Or, is there any way you can talk us through restoring the process?" I exhaled slowly. "Julian, I never sabotaged anything, but the system was designed with security in mind. The credentials for those backups were stored using rotating keys negotiated with our vendors. They change monthly, and the chain of custody is encrypted. I was the only one authorized to manage those renewals." A pause. Then a faint, almost broken "oh." I also built multi-layered verification into every critical script I added. That's why they rarely failed. But if someone went in and tried to clean up redundancy, they may have removed conditions that protected the system from itself. Julian didn't answer. I imagined him sitting in the server room, surrounded by blinking lights and screens flashing red, realizing in real time that what he was trying to maintain was never just a set of codes, it was a philosophy of stability. And that philosophy had been dismissed the moment Callum decided to chase Optimization. "Is there anything we can do?" he finally asked. I looked down at my phone. I had just received an email from Axis Link Systems confirming a second interview. They were impressed by my resume. They wanted to talk today. "I'm sorry, Julian," I said calmly. "I don't work at NovaGrid anymore. I'm not authorized to assist. You'll need to speak to Callum, and he may want to contact the vendors directly, though they'll probably want to renegotiate the service contracts now that access has been compromised." There was silence on the other end. Then softly, "I understand." "I hope things stabilize," I said. And I meant it. But deep down I knew that things were only just beginning to unravel. 2 days after Julian's panicked phone call, I received another one, this time from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. On the other end was a familiar voice, one I hadn't expected to hear again so soon. "Miguel, this is Callum Wright." There was a forced calm in his tone, the kind executives use when trying not to show they're unraveling. I said nothing, letting him continue. "I believe there may have been some miscommunication surrounding your departure. We're currently experiencing a few integration difficulties, and your insight could be extremely helpful." I smiled, not with spite, but with clarity. This was the same man who 3 weeks ago sat across a table and told me I was no longer part of the future. And now here he was trying to reframe his decision, like a scheduling error. "What kind of difficulties are we talking about?" I asked, my voice measured. "Mostly routine issues. We're just having some minor challenges with vendor portals and legacy automation chains. It would be immensely helpful if you could assist on a short-term basis. As a consultant, of course, we'd be willing to compensate you appropriately for your time." I stood by my window watching my neighbor wash his car with casual precision, a stark contrast to the growing chaos behind Callum's polished voice. "Your team isn't able to resolve it." "They're learning," he replied, "but the systems you built seem to have a certain nuance." That was putting it mildly. What Callum now labeled as nuance was the result of 22 years of real-time system integration vendor, relationship management, and disaster recovery design. Each script I wrote didn't just execute commands. It anticipated failure, rerouted logic, and safeguarded critical operations before human error could interrupt them. You can't teach that in a 3-week handover, especially when you never bothered to ask for one. "Look," Miguel, Callum continued, "the consultants we brought in believed some of your processes were outdated, but they may have underestimated their importance." I let him say it. I wanted to hear those words. They rewrote certain scripts, disabled error handlers they thought were redundant. And now our primary backup system won't authenticate with 2 of our service providers. The audit logs are a mess. One of our clients has already suspended operations while waiting for resolution. I could picture it. The automation chain had collapsed, and with it, every safety net I'd quietly installed, safety nets that had saved NovaGrid from disaster on more than one occasion. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. Callum's voice dipped, losing its composure. "We need your help, just temporarily." "I'm flattered," I said. "But I've already accepted an offer at Axis Link Systems. I start next week." There was a long pause. Then sharply, "Axis Link. That's a direct competitor." "They're also a professional organization," I replied, "one that values expertise and long-term planning." Callum tried to recover. "Miguel, I hope you understand we have legal protections in place. Any proprietary knowledge you take to Axis Link." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "No, of course not. I'm simply reminding you of contractual obligations. And if any of the current issues are the result of intentional sabotage, that was enough." "Let me be very clear," I interrupted. "I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't have to. You removed the one person who understood the system's architecture, declined a proper transition, and expected junior staff and consultants to reverse engineer what took 2 decades to build." He tried to interject, but I didn't stop. "You gave me 2 hours' notice to leave, asked me to write down passwords on a sticky note, and sent me on my way. That's not a knowledge transfer. That's negligence." Silence. I continued now, more composed. Everything worked because it was designed to. What you're experiencing now isn't sabotage. It's consequence. Callum didn't respond. Maybe he knew I was right. Maybe he was writing down what I said, planning to spin it for the board. But none of that mattered anymore. I wish you luck, I said, but I'm no longer part of Novagrid, and I have no intention of returning. I ended the call. No anger, no satisfaction, just a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being understood, even if only after everything fell apart. My first morning at Axis Link Systems felt like stepping into a different world. Gone were the dull gray cubicles, the outdated software licenses, and the unspoken assumption that anyone over 50 must be on the verge of irrelevance. Instead, I was greeted by a young receptionist who already knew my name, issued my credentials with a welcome packet, and handed me a card signed by the entire integration team. I hadn't even booted up my system yet, and already I felt more seen than I had in my final 5 years at Novagrid. My title was Senior Systems Architect, a mouthful, yes, but it came with weight, real authority, real responsibility. Patricia Wells, the Director of Engineering, met me before lunch to walk through the roadmap. She had done her homework. Miguel, we brought you in because our legacy infrastructure is stable, but it's not scalable. You've lived through growth phases most of our team hasn't even studied. We need your judgment, not just your code. That hit differently. It wasn't just that she valued my experience. It was that she respected the context of my experience, the late nights, the firefights, the trade-offs made, under pressure that no theory or playbook could fully explain. They didn't want me to rewrite everything from scratch. They wanted me to guide them through real evolution, strategically, thoughtfully. I was invited to weekly planning meetings from day one, asked to lead design reviews, and given a budget to build a small team for integration testing. And I wasn't surrounded by yes-men or posturing managers. The staff here had talent younger, yes, but open, curious, and eager to learn, not replace. 3 days in, Patricia called me into her office. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to recommend anyone from your former team. I know things didn't end well there, but if there's anyone you believe has potential, we'd like to consider them. I didn't even need to think. Julian didn't deserve what they dropped on him, I said. He's still green, but he works hard and asks the right questions. Patricia nodded. Let's talk to him. A week later, I received a text from Julian. Just got off the call with Axis Link. They're offering me a junior integration specialist position. Did you recommend me? I responded simply, you earned it. He replied, I don't know what to say. I told him the truth. You don't need to say anything. Just show up ready. Julian joined the team 2 weeks later. We were assigned a shared migration project for one of Axis Link's newest clients, ironically, a former Novagrid partner. It was a strange feeling opening up their broken files and seeing the remnants of my original logic butchered by consultants who didn't understand why each conditional existed. I didn't comment on it. I just rebuilt it properly this time, with Julian watching, learning, asking. Why did you structure the API call like that, he asked, during one session? Because this vendor sometimes returns a null before full authentication. If you don't account for it, the error log fills up and triggers a false retry loop, crashes the whole chain within 5 minutes. He blinked. That actually happened twice. Back in 2017, it cost us 2 clients before I figured it out. He nodded and wrote it down. Not just the code, the story. The logic behind the logic. That's what he was learning now. That's what nobody at Novagrid ever bothered to ask about. Over the next month, I watched Julian gain confidence. He moved from shadowing to owning modules, then leading small tests. He still had a long way to go, but he had what mattered most: humility and discipline. Axis Link gave him the space to grow the same space I was now being given after years of being dismissed as too rigid. We secured 2 major clients by the end of the quarter, both of whom had left Novagrid after their systems collapsed post-departure. One client even requested me by name after hearing I had joined Axis Link. That had never happened at Novagrid. The difference was undeniable. Here, I wasn't a relic to be replaced. I was a pillar being reinforced. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth every day. I just had to be myself, and that was more than enough. NovaGrid had optimized me out. AccessLink had brought me in not to catch up with the future, but to help build it. It was a little after 7 p.m. on a Thursday when Julian called again. I had just wrapped up a client review session at AccessLink and was sitting in my car letting the silence settle in. The office parking lot was nearly empty, the last rays of Texas sunlight casting long shadows across the pavement. My phone buzzed. Julian's name lit up the screen. He didn't bother with pleasantries. They brought in another outside consultant this time from Chicago. He said breath-quick words. Clipped. He's supposed to rebuild the automation framework from scratch. That's the third one in 4 weeks. I didn't interrupt. I could already picture what was happening. He's been here for 2 weeks, Julian continued, and nothing works better than it did before. He keeps trying to patch the systems with off-the-shelf tools, but they don't fit. Every time they fix one thing, 3 other things break. Nobody knows where anything connects anymore. It wasn't surprising. Those systems weren't modular like most consultants expected. They were layered, organic, and purpose-built not just for NovaGrid's tech stack, but for its people, its vendors, and its timing. Each function was designed to interact with 3 others, and when you touch one piece without understanding the rest, the whole thing destabilizes. And Callum, I asked. Julian laughed dryly. He's trying to keep the board calm. Last I heard, one of our top logistics clients threatened legal action over a week-long outage. They lost 2 shipping contracts because our system failed to sync regional inventory. It's getting ugly. I wasn't shocked. I had spent years building a live synchronization network that accounted for latency regional vendor differences and SKU anomalies. One bad schema update could tear the whole network apart, and it sounded like that's exactly what had happened. I thanked Julian for the update, and after we hung up, I sat in silence, watching my breath fog the windshield. The structure I'd built with care and precision was now being pulled apart by people who never learned how it worked. Not because they were malicious, because they were rushed, because someone told them the old way wasn't worth saving. The next day, I ran into Melissa, a former NovaGrid vendor account manager at a gas station just off I-45. She recognized me before I saw her. Miguel? Oh my God, are you hearing what's going on over there? I nodded cautiously. Bits and pieces. She exhaled. It's a mess. Total collapse. Our account rep says half of their clients have stopped using NovaGrid's automation platform. Some are moving to full manual input. You know what that means? Cost delays, human error. We're back in the Stone Age. I didn't say anything. Melissa leaned in. We're being told they might shut down the integration department completely and outsource it. Honestly, I'm not even sure the company's going to survive another quarter at this rate. Later that evening, I shared all this with Patricia, my director at AccessLink, during a strategic planning session. 3 more former NovaGrid clients reached out today, she said. They're asking for emergency transition plans. They've lost confidence. Their boards want off that ship before it goes under. I nodded. We can handle it. Patricia spread out a series of folders across the table, each labeled with a client name I once supported. We'll rebuild their systems the right way, with stability, with continuity, and with someone who understands the risks. That last part, it meant more than she knew. In the following weeks, I worked side by side with our team to draft migration blueprints, diagnose vulnerabilities, and reconstruct mission-critical functions for these incoming clients. This time I had more support, better resources, and the one thing I'd been denied for years, professional trust. Julian had fully integrated into our team by now. He was adapting quickly, not just technically, but philosophically. He no longer asked how to fix a bug. He asked why the system needed to work a certain way in the first place. That shift from function to meaning was everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that once decided I was outdated had now become a cautionary tale for every executive in the region. Everyone in the Houston tech scene was talking NovaGrid. They lost their core guy and crumbled. It was no longer rumor, it was reputation, and all I had done was leave. Quietly, Professionally? Permanently? It was a Friday afternoon in November, almost exactly 3 months since the day I had walked out of Novagrid carrying a cardboard box and 22 years of loyalty. I was in my office at AccessLink reviewing specs for a major migration project when Patricia knocked gently on the door. "Callum Wright is online too," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "He says it's urgent." I stared at the phone for a moment, then picked it up. "This is Miguel." Callum's voice came through tight and subdued. "Miguel, I'm calling to inform you that Novagrid has been acquired." I leaned back in my chair. "That was fast. The acquisition includes all assets, contracts, and system infrastructure." He continued, "Effective immediately, Meridian Analytics now holds full operational control." I said nothing. I didn't need to. The new management has requested a full audit of our technical platforms. During that process, they've identified several deficiencies. We believe your expertise could greatly benefit the transition. I could hear what he wasn't saying. This wasn't about transition support. This was about salvaging what was left of a broken framework, the same one I had built, and they had tried to rewrite without understanding. "They are prepared to offer you a senior director position," Callum added, "with complete authority over systems integration, vendor relationships, and technical auditing. Compensation will be significant." There was a time not long ago when I would have jumped at that offer. A title like that, a chance to rebuild what I had loved, a return to the empire I once helped shape. But I wasn't the same man anymore. I looked out the window. Below, my team at AccessLink was wrapping up their week, Trevor and Julian walking together across the parking lot, laughing about something I couldn't hear. They had grown, so had I. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, "but I'm happy where I am." There was a pause. "Miguel, I want you to know, I realize mistakes were made, how your departure was handled, the decisions we made after. If you're willing to return, we'd be open to revisiting terms. You'd have full control this time, no interference." It sounded rehearsed, or maybe desperate. I couldn't tell anymore. For 19 years, I kept Novagrid afloat. I said my tone even. I maintained critical systems, negotiated vendor protocols, ran integrations. Nobody else understood. I did it without asking for recognition. I did it because I believed in the work. "I know," he said quietly. "And when you removed me, I continued. You didn't just lose an employee. You lost the one person who had built your resilience. You didn't replace me. You removed the glue, then wondered why the pieces fell apart." "I'm not proud of how it happened," he admitted. "But we're offering you the chance to come back, to make it right." "No, Callum," I replied. "You're offering me the chance to fix what you broke. And the truth is, some damage can't be undone." He said nothing. I finished. What Novagrid needs is not a leader. It needs a reckoning. I ended the call. Later that evening, Patricia stopped by again. "You handled that well," she said. I nodded. It was never about the title. It was about the respect. By the end of that quarter, AccessLink had absorbed 6 of Novagrid's top-tier clients. 2 more were in negotiation. We weren't growing through conquest, we were growing through credibility, reliability, stability. The very principles I had fought for back when no one was listening. Julian had become one of our most promising young architects. Trevor had built an alert monitoring system inspired by some of my older frameworks and proudly presented it at our weekly demo. And I had something I'd never had before, a team that listened and a leadership that trusted. Novagrid still existed, technically, but everyone in the region knew the truth. Their collapse wasn't about software. It was about arrogance, short-sightedness, the cost of underestimating people who quietly hold the system together. I never raised my voice. I never leaked a single file. I never sought revenge. But I found something better, a place where I didn't need to prove I mattered. Because here I did. In technology, we talk a lot about systems, platforms, and processes, but rarely do we talk about the people behind them. The ones who stayed late, who caught the silent errors before they spread, who designed with foresight, not ego. When you remove experience without knowledge, transfer, you're not optimizing, you're gambling. Nova Grid didn't fall because of one mistake. It fell because it misunderstood the value of wisdom. It believed systems could run themselves, that age equaled redundancy, that loyalty could be costed out of a budget spreadsheet. But what they lost wasn't just a man. They lost memory. They lost foresight. They lost the quiet stability that only years of hard-earned judgment can offer. And in the end, they came back not for help, but for rescue. To anyone watching who's ever felt underestimated, unrecognized, or replaced, let this story be your reminder. True value doesn't vanish. It waits, and when the moment comes, it speaks through results, not revenge. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever been the quiet one holding everything together, leave a comment below. Just write, "They didn't see me, but I held it all." That's how we'll know you were here.